In the United States, frail, confused, bitterly partisan, desecrating the memory of recently murdered children with tired talking points from the Democratic Party, dividing the country in a moment of deep pain rather than uniting. His voice rising, amplified only as he repeats the talking points he repeated for over 35 years in the United States Senate. Partisan politics being the only thing that animates him. Unfit for leadership of this country. Will Cain is a man we trust. He often fills in on this show. He's also the host of Fox and Friends Weekend. Will Cain, what a moment this would have been if he had stopped a sentence in and said, we're going to pray for these families, and let's let this marinate for a minute. Let's stand respectfully before a tragedy. And Joe Biden has lived tragedy, so he could say that with some credibility. He moved immediately into some DNC rant off a cue card. That's the president?
What a moment this almost was.
Yes.
Was there a moment at the beginning of the speech, it sounded like he might bring this country together, talking about the loss inside someone when they lose a child, the hole that never will be filled, quoting scripture, which is so important in this moment, Tucker, because what we're suffering from culturally is a rot of spirituality, a loss of meaning. And then you're exactly right. He turns and gets animated when it's time to cast blame, when it's time to point fingers, when it's time to be partisan. You know, he can't point to a single law that would have stopped this shooter because he doesn't know what this shooter did yet, what gun he used. He knows nothing about the details of this crime. And so therefore he knows not what law he could offer that would solve this crime, which reveals it was just simply partisanship. I've been listening to you tonight, Tucker, and I do share this sentiment with you. It's a true reflection of character, and not limited to the President of the United States. If your first instinct is to turn to partisanship, if your first instinct is to blame those who disagree. You know, I know you're probably familiar with this, Tucker. David Foster Wallace gave an amazing speech once where he said, you don't get a choice of whether or not to worship. You get a choice as to what you worship. And what we are seeing people worship politics. And if that's the case, they'll sacrifice anything for their own righteousness, for their own narcissism, for their own partisanship.
I mean, to stand before the image of murdered children and your first impulse is, I can be more powerful if only I leverage this in the right way. That's what the President of the United States, I'm in shock having seen the President of the United States call for, more power for himself. That's his answer?
Well, the only reason I'm not in shock, Tucker, is I was around, and so were you, when I saw Barack Obama stand on the graves of dead children as well. And so this was somewhat anticipatory. You could expect this would be what would happen. And again, Tucker, I've been listening to you tonight, and you've been asking some important questions. For example, I heard you ask Judge Pirro earlier in the show, do we study these things? Do we study these shooters? How can we stop them in the future? You know, in the 80s, we put together a behavioral science unit at the FBI to stop serial killers. Now, these guys in these situations often kill themselves. We can see what makes them tick. We can do more. We can put money into protecting schools. We just gave $40 billion, Tucker, to Ukraine to protect and rebuild that country. We can't afford to protect our schools. We immediately put money into protecting schools from COVID. By the way, much of it, which is not yet used, could be used to protecting schools. There are things we can do, but the most important thing, Tucker, is figure out what's going on culturally with this country. We are callous, we are partisan, we are not spiritual, and we have lost meaning.
I hope we will not let politicians leverage our grief to make them more powerful for their aggrandizement. It's really disgusting, if I can say. Will Cain, I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.